If we can, okay, we can get started now.
All right, welcome everyone. This is the Licensing Reform Task Force Construction Subcommittee meeting here on the first day of May. Aaron, can you start us out with roll, please?
Yes, thank you, Senator Harvey.
Here.
Bob Dean. I thought I saw him.
Here.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
couldn't find my unmute.
Okay, great. Senator Noland,
Here.
Senator Zolnikoff,
Here.
Representative Seconder. Okay, Representative Teal,
Here.
and Director Strauss,
Here.
Webb Brown,
Present.
John Harding,
Here.
Troy Jensen.
I'm here.
Great. Kelly is not. Allison Paul. No. Okay, and Jason Small.
Here.
Perfect. Okay, almost everybody this morning. Thank you. And then I'll go ahead and introduce staff. Erin Sullivan, policy analyst with the department. And then we also have Quinlan O'Connor, who's our chief legal counsel and your counsel for this subcommittee. And Lisa Patzer, who's the technology expert for the task force. And then we also have, let's see who all, we've got a lot from licensing. We've got Kevin Bragg, who's the bureau chief for the licensing division. And then we have Tracy Gonzalez, who is section chief for licensing. I'm going to mess this up. She's a section chief, and Hugh Pratt is also a section chief. They work with Kevin on licensing. And then we have Teresa McGowan, and I'm going to butcher your other last name, so I'll just say McGowan. She's our bureau chief for compliance. And I believe that is it for staff today.
Thanks, Aaron. So, moving into our first topic today, we're going to be talking about and reviewing workforce availability. At our last meeting, we had a pretty robust discussion about some of the hurdles certain trades and certain areas are experiencing with just getting folks interested in licensure or apprenticeships. Um, is there any outstanding issues that anybody has or any ideas that have came up since the last meeting on stuff we can do with licensure that will help this workforce availability? Not seeing any. Does anybody have any recommendations on how we move forward with workforce addressing workforce availability? Um, I'll just kind of speak personally here on this. I feel a lot of our discussion we had last meeting was a very good discussion and very good to get out there. Um, I didn't hear a lot of ideas that we could address through licensure. A lot of it I felt was really advertising and letting it be known, that these opportunities are available to folks. And I really wasn't making a good connection on how that could be addressed through licensure reform. But if anybody else has any ideas around that, this would be the time, and we kind of need to figure out a direction that we want to head on this workforce availability. John?
So as far what you just stated is actually 100% accurate. I don't see how licensing would do anything for workforce availability. We There was an article in the news I still watch the news at night, by the way, and it's local news.
Yes.
There was an article just a couple of days ago talking about a new veterinary clinic system that came to Montana to allow. It's not vets; it would be the equivalent of like a CNA type person that's a vet. So it's the beginning level or an entry level, but it's a new program that's available in Montana to apprentice to be a vet. But nothing in the world of licensing would change any of that. And I think the same thing happens when you look at the bulk of licensing being plumbers and electrician. I'm sorry, apprentice programs, plumbers and electricians, and surely there's some in the carpentry industry as well. But licensing isn't going to do anything to change any of that, I don't believe.
Yeah, thanks, John. And that's exactly how I was feeling as well. I think another thing is just getting projects here in the state. I know there's lots of hurdles going on now, and lots of concern around data centers in my area. And it's getting through, other processes, not necessarily licensure that these projects are running into hurdles around. So with that, I'll I'll ask again of the subcommittee, is there any further recommendations on workforce availability that we want to work on moving forward? All right, we'll move forward then. Our next agenda item is construction contractor and independent contractors program and enforcement review. And we're fortunate to have staff on today to kind of guide us through this discussion. So it looks like first we're going to talk with Hugh Pratt about construction contractor licensing.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Hugh Pratt. I'm the section chief of professional licensing boards and programs, and I am the first to start us off with contractor licensing. Following me will be Tracy Gonzalez with the independent contractor exemption, and then Teresa McGowan, and I'm going to butcher that last name too, so I'm not going to try. We'll talk about enforcement. So I'm just here to give you a brief overview of the historical contractor registration and where we came to from this last session, starting on January 1st of this year with contractor licensing. Next slide. So contractor registration was originally started as a bill, Senate Bill 354 in the 1995 legislative session. The registration was intended to ensure contractors follow laws governing workers' compensation coverage, employment insurance, and other state laws. It was also intended to provide consumers of construction services are protected, as well as ensure that all individuals in the construction business are operating on a level playing field with regard to compliance with state laws. The registration was established for all construction contractors with employees. What Tracy will be talking about a little bit following me, the independent contractor exemption came before that. So following the 1995 legislative session, the 1997 legislative session saw a new bill that was House Bill 252, which was originally intended to actually repeal the contractor registration, but that was amended in the final bill actually repealed the bonding requirements as well as expanding exemptions and decreasing the renewal fee to $70. Now, following that, there wasn't too many bills that touched on contractor registration. There was one bill in 2005, which was Senate Bill 64, and then a final bill, House Bill. There's a bill in 2019 that just touched on some fees. So just some historical context here. So who needed it? It was for all construction contractors with employees. It was required that it was assuring that all construction contractors follow the Montana Workers' Compensation Act, Unemployment Insurance Act, and other applicable state laws. The benefits to the consumer for that contractor registration is that there was protection from employee liability, meaning that if you hired a contractor who had the registration, you were yourself exempt from any liability if anything were to happen on that site. There was also visual compliance with regulations, meaning that that card right there you see, that's an example of what that registration looked like. There was also an ability to verify registration, which I will touch on at the end of mine. That site is still up for the back end system where you can look up an individual to see if they have either an independent contractor exemption certificate or a contractor registration. Now, benefits to the contractor, there was expanded opportunities, meaning that generally, if you were in the construction business and you had a registration, you might see more opportunities come away for bigger jobs or stuff like that. And again, it was also visible compliance. If you yourself was holding a card, then you're going to see everybody else holding that card as well. So that was what the contractor registration was. Next slide, please. This last, the 2025 legislative session, we saw House Bill 239, which many of you guys are aware of, which established construction contractor licensing. That contractor licensing laws went into effect on January 1st of this past year. It was a collective effort among interested stakeholders, legislators, and the department to ensure that we captured everything we needed to talk about within that. What it really did is it converted that registration into a license. And what I mean when it converted into a license, the qualifications to get your registration, anything like that, did not change. You still have to show compliance with the workers' comp, with unemployment, and show registration. It's business registration, but it expanded the disciplinary process. It expanded the complaint process. It allows both the contractors and individuals more opportunities to go to handle issues that do arise. Another thing that it did is it transferred the application side of that into what is our database, the Excel database. And so we have an online portal that people can use to apply for a license and all that. But that also expanded their license verification backend search. And that's a picture of it there. And again, I will go into that as well. One thing to note, the independent contractors without employees are exempt, and that is what Tracy will talk. That is something that we did hear, the department did hear quite a bit during the 2025 roadshow as a gap of accountability, and that is something we are aware of. So those are still, independent contractors is still not a license or anything, but they are exempt. Next slide. So benefits to the industry. There's some programmatic flexibility with this construction contractor licensing. We have set it up as a department program with an identified program manager who is David White, and I do have his contact information on the next slide. But what that means is there's a more robust rulemaking process. There's more ability for people to participate in that process, whether that be interested stakeholders, individuals, or anything like that. There's another benefit is digital infrastructure. Again, like I spoke, there was an online application and renewal process. The prior process that we have is a very paper-driven process. If you ever are in our office, you will generally see people at our offices getting that taken care of. Not that we don't want that or anything, but this gives more people flexibility to not have to drive to Helena to get this done. It expands our access to customer service. We do have a dedicated customer service team that can handle calls, that can help with any sort of issues that may arise, whether it be on the portal or any kind of questions. It provided a disciplinary mechanism for bad actors. Like with anything, you want to ensure that there's bad actors out there. There's some way to have some sort of a disciplinary matrix on the back end. For any current registrants, those people automatically be converted to a license. So there's not a reapplication process necessary. They will be transferring, but they are a license now. And then if we did also want to point out that the retained education funding prior with the contractor registration, there was a established amount of funding that needs to happen to go to the education of the public and the industry. That funding still maintained. I can't remember off the top of my head what that is, but that's the benefits to the industry. For the benefits to the consumer, we did establish unprofessional conduct standards, and those can be found in MCA Title 37, Chapter 45, and that is as well as ARM 24.227.2301. Those are all unprofessional conduct standards that apply to licensees. That is a benefit for consumer because it allows, it really just expands that disciplinary process. We do have a dedicated complaint staff, meaning that we have an individual who is dedicated to intaking complaints and touching on that process, taking calls or anything like that. And we have expanded investigative capabilities. We have a dedicated team of investigators who do investigate claims or complaints that are made against licensees, and they can do an in-depth investigation on focusing on issues within that licensing framework. So one thing I do want to point out as far as unprofessional conduct standards, one of the things that is not, or workmanship is not considered unprofessional conduct. So I always say, if like, as an example, if you go to a restaurant and you eat and you're eating a burger, if you eat a bad burger, meaning like you get sick from the burger, that is something that could potentially be disciplinary because they served you bad food. However, if you don't like the burger just because it doesn't taste good, that is not an unprofessional conduct. That is not something that would be held against that person. They just didn't make a good burger. So there's a lot of different benefits to the consumers and the industry. We are currently getting this all stood up and ready to go. But yeah, and so on the next slide, Aaron, you'll find some contacts within this. So David White, as I mentioned, is our program manager, and that program manager really helps oversee the program, answer questions, help guide people to where they need to go, all that kind of stuff. We do have a dedicated unit, the construction contractor licensing examiner unit, and that is a dedicated phone number as well as email for those individuals. I mentioned earlier, we have a customer service team. That is their phone number. And then Jeremy Rothenbuehler is the compliance specialist assigned to the construction contractor license. So he will intake any complaints or help guide people through the complaint process from beginning to end. And if it's all right with you, Aaron, I would like to share my screen in order to show the license verification. Let's see if I can get. Okay. So for everybody to see, this is, wait, I gotta see if I can get, there we go. This is the original contractor registration license verification search. And you can, if you just type into Google, Montana contractor registration verification, you'll come to their main website. And on that main website, there is a tab to the right saying verify contractor registration. Now, within this, you can look up both a business name, a city, a registration number, which would be for contractor registration, or a last name. So you can really finalize or deduce it down. So I just went ahead and just selected Helena as a location. So if I do Helena and I just select enter, it will give me all registrations, and for contractors and independent contractors that have located in Helena, or they've identified Helena as their contact city. Now, so you'll see a long list. You have 21 entries. You can also select whatever that registration number is. And once you open that up, it'll give you the file of that contractor registration. So great system. For the new system under the licensing verification, that can be found if you go to any professional board's website. At the top of the website, there is a blue link that states look up a license, or you can just go to type it into Google Montana license lookup, and there's a general link right to it. So the way I always like to talk about this license search is it's a pull into our backend database. But as with anything, the more specific you can make a search is the more specific you can get to an individual. So like I did with Montana Contractor, I can just look up Helena as a city, and it'll give me every single license affiliated with Helena, which for a lot of licenses, we have that would be a lot of results. But you can break it down by board. You can break it down by license type. You can break it down by license number, first name, last name, all that kind of stuff. So I just selected the home inspector program with the city of Helena, and we do have security functions on here to ensure against bots. But then you just type in the dates. I have to restart this one. Go back to Helena. And then down here, I just type in 8743 search. So it'll take me to all licenses that are found with the home inspector licensing program that have a contact of Helena. Now, if I select one of these, so say I select this first one right here, it'll give me a good amount of information about this. So it'll give me who the individual is, where they're located. The other thing to note is it also does put discipline. Discipline is posted for final orders only, meaning that there has been a final action taken against that license, and that is information is public. So you can find that here if you were to look up and see if somebody has had prior issues against them. You can look up their license and find that final order here. With that, I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I don't know if I need to turn it over. I turn it over to Tracy for the next presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. Appreciate it.
Real quick, do you want to do questions on this segment before moving on to Tracy's presentation, or do all the presentations and then have a discussion, Senator Harvey?
Yeah, we can do questions on this first part. That's probably best.
Okay.
It looks,
Okay.
Senator Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really appreciate the information and how to find concerns or problems. When I initially addressed everybody and shared some frustrations that our county was having, and it was regarding discipline, excuse me, and I still don't know answers. So when this was the road that was built, cost a lot of money, had to do it 3 times. I think I shared with you all that. And our county people said, you guys need to come up with something so we have the ability to restrict or something. I said, well, make the bond higher. So I had a question for you. What was the reasoning that the bonding bill was repealed? And I can't remember what year you said, 95 or something. Why was that?
I am not entirely sure. I didn't find any information about that. I can do some looking into that to see if I can get you that information. It is from the 1997 legislative session. Like I said, that bill was originally intended to start out as a contractor registration repeal, and then it got amended down to the just removing bonding requirements and a few other small ones. But I can certainly look into that and provide that information to Aaron to pass along.
Okay, Mr. Chair, could I continue?
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. So I don't have an answer for them to tell them, make your bonding higher. They're telling me we have to do something. And I go, I don't see why that is an issue for us, but that's what the county commissioners have said. So I am asking, and I'm looking for, and I can go now and look at all these different sites that you said and see if this person's on that site for being that he violated some issues and the complaints. Because I have not done that, so I can do that. So basically, on my question of are we and do we need to, under the construction licensing task force subcommittee, what can we do, or do we need to give the counties some more rope? I don't want to say to hang themselves, but rope to make contractors that are legitimate. They've had, in one particular instance, had 3 complaints, and nothing happened. That guy's doing 2 more jobs, got 2 complaints there so far. So I go, well, they're asking me, what can we do? And I don't know. So I'm putting that out to the committee. If there's those of you who are in this field, you might have experience of what you've done, turned it into complaints. They're telling me that they can't make a higher bond. And I go, well, that's the only thing I know to do. If they're going to bid on your projects, but they botched 3, we can't blackball people, but we can make them, because we know they're a repeated offender, so to speak, make their bond higher. Now, if that's not fair, that's kind of what they're probably asking, or what they're asking, then we need to have everybody do this. And I don't think so. If you've got the black mark 3 times against you, on one project, 2 times against you on another one, surely there's got to be something that can be done and that needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nolan. I agree. It'd be interesting to know the history of why that went away. And I think it's a valid, very valid discussion that we could have moving forward. So would definitely appreciate a little research on that. So, John.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So as I recall, I've actually been involved with this contractor registration even back into 95 when it first started. And that was kind of a knockdown drag out legislatively back then, trying to get folks on board with any type of registration. Ultimately, it did happen, and the program's been okay until the recent legislation that was more significant with HB 239 that happened last session, which is actually a pretty good bill overall, to put a little more teeth in not contractor registration and contractor licensing is what we have it now. So registration was you just send your $75 in and you get your registration provided you meet the criteria. That was very minimal. Criteria is still very minimal. So Department of Labor did what I thought was a really nice job in adhering to the rules of HB 239. And it doesn't change a lot, other than putting a little bit of teeth into like a disciplinary process or complaints. There's a place to actually have that happen now, and it's good. One of my big industry worries is that those complaints become something where we're talking about workmanship, and that becomes a really big can of worms to try to get some sort of group involved in whatever group that would be in the disciplinary process of a tile guy that didn't do a very good job for Mrs. Smith. And I just couldn't imagine that the Department of Labor or any other group would want to get interested in trying to have a hearing deciding if the tile guy did a bad job. So I'm really happy to hear that we are talking about unprofessional conduct, things such as not the dirt road guy. I'll address that here in a second if I can, but the unprofessional contact or conduct is the stories that you hear about the guy that knocks on a door after a hailstorm, says, I can replace your roof, Mrs. Smith. I like to use Mrs. Smith since there's no Smiths on here, so it's just a generic name. So I can replace your roof, and if I can get half down, we'll start tomorrow. And the guy that gets half down disappears. Unprofessional conduct. We'll find that guy, and hopefully the teeth of this new program, this licensing program that comes out of 239, will be able to do something about that. As far as that same guy, he shows up 2 days later and performs his job, and he does a horrible project. That shouldn't be something that falls into the Department of Labor's hands. That would be something that ultimately, unfortunately, would end up, the next avenue there would be something that would happen with litigation. The explanation, and I don't know who gave that earlier, about the bad hamburger, that's a perfect example. Construction is no different than that. There are people that aren't there. There's tradespeople that are at the top of their industry, and there's tradespeople at the bottom. Those guys at the bottom, it doesn't mean that they should be able to, that there should be a place where someone calls and complains, and then all of a sudden we've got a guy that's not the greatest, or a company that's not the greatest at the work that they're doing, but they're doing okay, and they're not scamming anybody or taking their money. They're just not the greatest at it. But all of a sudden, we have a list at the bottom showing that they've had 14 complaints filed against them because they're not very good tile guys. That's what our industry is concerned about, is something like that showing up in Department of Labor and then not being able to properly address what you deem to be poor quality work. So I'm glad that we're headed down this other road. As far as the bonding part goes, as far as what I recall, and this may not be accurate, but that bond back then was similar to like a hairstylist or a notary. They have to have a bond when they when they receive their registration, and the bond was minimal, and bonds are typically attached in the construction industry. They're attached to the value of a job. So in the world of dirt work in a county somewhere, if 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 company XYZ gets a contract, the county would say this project needs to be bonded. And the bond at that point is the value of the project. And that exists now, and it's a pretty good system. There are tons of projects that don't have bonds, but that's chosen by either the county or an individual or a private company that decide that they think that this general contractor is a good enough contractor that are not going to require them to bond on a project. So that's kind of how that goes. So and then the bond is something that, once again, it doesn't guarantee quality work. What it guarantees is that the work will be complete. Um, and at the end of that process, if the county's not happy with what's happened, then the county has the ability to do the same thing. They would say, well, we have a punch list on this project. We don't pay the project completely. Most projects have a retainage of at least 5%. So if you're doing $1 million project, there's 50 grand that's going to be held back until this county is satisfied. So that system right now is pretty good. And I can't think that our group would want to start getting involved in coming up with some sort of fix for that. That bonding process has been a good system for a very, very long time. With that, I'll quit chatting. And I think I might have had one other thing. As far as the ICs, we were talking about ICs earlier. Maybe that'll come up in a few minutes. But when we talk about ICs, I think that there's probably more ICs working in the construction industry in Montana than there are actual licensees. So as we have that conversation, it'll be interesting what information they have. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Hugh, I have a question, and kind of got stirred up by some of John's comments there. Is there any type of requirements in licensure? Um, when that person comes and knocks on the door and talks with Mrs. Smith about her hail damage, is there any requirement that the document they hand her or the contract they hand her has the license number on it, or at least the name? Is there any type of regulation around that? I was even thinking, like, are the vehicles that are working on the road project, do they have to have some type of identifier? It seems like I've heard stories where, person gets knocked on the door and the guy had a hammer on his sweatshirt, and so that, they trusted in him just because of the logo. Is there any, I guess, regulation on what they have to identify themselves by?
I'm not entirely positive on the answer to that. Obviously, I could turn it over to Quinlan, our chief legal, as well. I don't believe so in statutory language for unprofessional conduct that there is a requirement to indicate that they are licensed or anything. I do believe that there's unprofessional conduct about misrepresenting something like that. But I would certainly refer to Quinlan on that.
Okay, thanks.
Happy to answer to the extent that I can. In terms of unprofessional conduct for construction contractors, no. As Hugh says, misrepresentation would certainly be a problem. There are other regulations, though, that can play in. For example, on the truck branding and those sorts of things. MDT or U.S. Department of Transportation regulations may require certain things to be labeled, and there are some other requirements for CDL operation and those sorts of things. But it's not part of construction contractor licensing. What is unprofessional conduct on our end is very closely tied to misrepresentations and fraud and theft of assets and those sorts of things. That's where the focus was during the legislative session, and that's we added a couple of things in rules that, but again, very closely tied into that.
Okay, thanks, Quinlan. Senator Zonikoff.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Harvey. I just think it's important to keep in mind you can't have over-the-top standards that will prevent the use of common sense or ban people from making dumb decisions. So we're trying to figure out if there's anything in the way, not how to create more things to stop that one-off case. Because there will always be someone in a truck that pretends to be somebody they're not to scam people. Now the real question is there an economic impact by trying to address those people to everybody else who does it right? Are we trying to address the bad and hurting the good? So just keep that in mind instead of letting this go in a different direction on additional licensing. So
Sure.
there's my two.
Sounds good. Thank you. Any other questions for Hugh on this section? All right. Looks like we're now kicking it over to Tracy.
All right. Hello. Yes, my name is Tracy Gonzalez. I work as the section chief overseeing the license examiners for the Professional Licensing Bureau. Prior to that change, I did work with the Independent Contractor Central Unit that was in place for several years. So familiar with the independent contractor program. The independent contractor exemption is pretty unique as far as it's different from the professional and occupational licenses. It's rooted more in the workers' compensation compliance. And I did want to share just a little bit of that history and why it came to be. Go ahead, next slide, Erin. So in Montana, a person who is hired to perform a service and is compensated for that service is considered an employee by law. An employee status is the default. So if you hire somebody, you pay them to do work, you are their employer. There's a couple exceptions to that, one of them being the independent contractor. If a person is free from control and direction, meaning the hiring agent doesn't dictate how they perform the work, they're just satisfied with the end result, and that individual is independently established in their own trade, occupation, profession, or business. That's what we refer to as the AB test or the common law test for an independent contractor. In Montana, we've tried to make that issue a little more black and white by requiring that they have that workers' comp or an independent contractor exemption certificate. Next slide. All right, so when we're considering why this is important to distinguish between an employee and an independent contractor, it's important for both parties, and misclassifying workers can be costly on all sides. So employees have the right to many protections established by law. They are subject to minimum wage and overtime, unpaid job, FMLA leave, anti-discrimination and anti-retaliation protections, workers' compensation. So if they're injured on the job, they have protection that way. They're also protected by unemployment insurance and the employer portion of the Social Security and Medicare taxes. So those are automatic benefits for the fact that a person is an employee and the employer is responsible for those. So misclassifying the workers really creates an unfair competitive advantage over those that follow the law because there's a cost to those. People who skirt around that obviously are not subject, gives them an unfair advantage. State and federal agencies such as unemployment are impacted due to just lost revenue. And then probably most importantly is the misclassified workers really miss out on those protections and benefits that they're entitled to. Next slide. All right, so it really is the employer that bears the brunt of the just making sure that they're complying with those, providing those benefits for employees. Employees are responsible for classifying workers correctly and treating them accordingly. They can destroy that relationship by exerting too much control. Even if they've hired an independent contractor, they start providing tools controlling hours, things like that, that can destroy that relationship. Employers cannot coerce employees to adopt the independent contractor status just to avoid those employer obligations. We do see that this happens. People want to go to work and they want to be paid, so they'll go through with that process when probably they shouldn't. Violations on both sides, so from the hiring agent or employer perspective, as well as the independent contractor, if they're making misrepresentations or coercing their employees to that fact, they can be found in violation, and then they're subject to fines and penalties. And I believe Teresa will talk about that a little bit more. And again, if they do hire that independent contractor and exert too much control, the department can step in and nullify that independent contractor exemption. All right, next slide. So just going back to the public policy of the Workers' Compensation Act, the independent contractor exemption is specifically mentioned in there. It's the intent of the legislature to assert that a conclusive presumption exists that recognizes that a holder of a current valid ICEC issued by the department is an independent contractor if that person is working under the ICEC. Basically, that means within the occupation that they have disclosed to us. So conclusive presumption is the takeaway. Again, this was an attempt to make the issue black and white and trying to keep some of those disputes out of the court system. Next slide. All right, so what does the ICEC do for people? Well, for the individual, it relieves that person of the responsibility to obtain their workers' comp. Again, they have to have work comp or an ICEC. A lot of them choose to go the ICEC route. So a person working under that has waived all rights and benefits under the Workers' Compensation Act. They've also, they're not eligible for wage and hour, human rights, things like that as well. But the main thing is that workers' compensation. For the employer can rely on that conclusive presumption of the certificate unless the department determines the employer exerted too much control and suspends it. But up until the point where the department takes that certificate, their status is conclusively an independent contractor. And then for state agencies, such as unemployment insurance, Department of Revenue, wage and hour, human rights, and the uninsured employers fund, they do look to that certificate when they're determining employee status. And historically, they have been able to do that. A couple sessions ago, we did loosen that up a little bit, where now if somebody is representing themselves to be an independent contractor, potentially maybe provides a fraudulent certificate to a person, which we see occasionally, they can be deemed to be an independent contractor even without that certificate. But there's limited circumstances that way. All right, next slide. All right. So who needs to have an independent contractor exemption? It's basically anybody who's working outside of their own fixed business location. They have not elected to be covered under workers' comp. And we define a person as basically a business owner, so a sole proprietor, a working member of a partnership or an LLP, a working member of a member-managed LLC, or more specifically to the construction industry, a manager of a manager-managed LLC. So if they've set themselves up in business in one of these capacities and they act in that as the business owner, the one that's providing the work in any of these capacities, they are required to have an independent contractor exemption. And again, that's when they're outside of their own fixed business location. Next slide. All right, so the application process. The application process itself is fairly straightforward. They have to submit an application and tell us what occupations they perform as an independent contractor. Each distinct occupation must be supported by business documents. So you may have heard of the 15 points that are needed. A lot of people get, hung up on that or trip over that because they don't actually have a business established to support them. So the business documents and point values are listed by administrative rule. They include things such as business filing with Secretary of State. Maybe they set up a corporation or an LLC with them, or simply registered a business name. Maybe they have general commercial insurance, a business bank account, or maybe business advertising. And then those point values are lined out in administrative rule. And that was a way for us to just, it came about from a task force back in 2003, 2005 era that wanted to keep that conclusive presumption, but wanted to make sure the department was doing their due diligence and looking to make sure that that person was truly established in their own business. Prior to this last session, we did have a notary requirement for the application, so they were required to get that notarized. We have since removed that. So that should take care of some of that roadblock for people. They won't have to go in and get their application physically notarized. And we also did that anticipating the electronic ability to file online. They still have to attest to a bunch of things that we make them attest to, one of them being their identity, but no longer a wet signature or a notary. And then when we get the application, the examiners review that for completeness. They assign points to the various documents, and they either approve or deny that application. If the applicant completed the form correctly and are able to provide those business documents, the application is approved. There's one caveat to that, and if that's when our examiners are looking through that application and find strong evidence of control, perhaps a contract came in where it was clearly an employee-employer relationship, we can deny those as well. And that happens occasionally, not too much, but it does happen, and it is something that our examiners are trained to watch out for. And I don't have contact information here, but David White is the executive officer who will be handling the independent contractor program as well. So you have his contact information on the previous presentation from Hugh. I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you have questions later, to provide my contact information as well. And then I believe somebody had just mentioned the number of independent contractors versus the number of construction contractors. And I will just say that there are about 25,500 active independent contractors currently. About 65% of that is in the construction industry. So there is a high number there. The construction contractor, currently we have about 13,000, maybe a little more, active contractor licenses. And those were converted. So if they were registrations prior to January 1st, they have converted to the licensing piece of that. So that's kind of how those numbers work out. Again, 65% of our independent contractors are in the construction industry, but it really does run the gamut of, we have fishing guides, we have, we even have cosmetologists and things that may or may not need that. Construction, we have entertainers. So we have a whole bunch of different occupations within that. And I think that's it, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer any questions you do have.
Any questions for Tracy? Representative Teal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious, you mentioned it doesn't happen too often that you have to reject people who are applying who clearly are employees for this. Do you have any numbers, or would we be able to see any data of how many people are rejected, and then maybe what the cause is, just to have an idea of, I don't know, if there is a lot of problems in this program or not?
We can certainly pull those numbers for you.
Thank you. John?
Oh, yeah, thank you again. So this might be a question maybe more for Quentin, but Tracy maybe can answer it as well. So in that uh, House Bill 239 that was passed last year, there's uh, a line in there that's talking about um, allowing an independent contractor to perform work in the trade, business, or occupation or profession not listed in their independent contractor's license. So part of our industry is interested in what that might actually mean as far as, so let's use the roofer, for example. The roofer has an IC and he's working as a roofer. So when he's on the roof, the general contractor asks him, hey, we need to finish some of that fascia up on the gable end. Could you throw those boards up there while you're up there? Is that a violation? Does the language mean that the independent contractor needs to be registered as a roofer and then potentially as a carpenter as well? Or how does that work if the roofer is working in multiple trades? Because they do. I mean, there's a lot of folks that are independent contractors and they work in multiple trades. And it wouldn't be uncommon to have one of those ICs on a project somewhere that might be involved in multiple trades. So would they have to have multiple licenses stating that?
So I can let Tracy talk about the mechanics of license of the ICEC and listing multiple occupations. Short version is you can have multiple occupations listed on your ICEC. So you can say that you're going to do roofing and siding and concrete, and each of those things can be listed on there. This is very much not a new requirement. So it's been since the beginning of the current iteration of the IC program in 2005 that the independent contractor exemption certificate is solely applicable to the occupations that are listed on the ICEC. In the 20, I believe it was three, it might have been 21 session, Representative Gist carried a bill to expand somewhat the penalties that were available for essentially a construction contractor that was allowing somebody to work not under their ICEC and misclassifying that work. And that was really the point of his bill was if you're doing independent contractor misclassification, then there were enhanced monetary penalties against the construction contractor. Essentially, they're in the best position to not have that person working outside of their ICEC, and therefore there should be enhanced monetary penalties. So what was in 239 was just carrying over the same language that already existed into the licensing requirements. There was nothing new there. And as I say, from the beginning of the ICEC program in its current iteration, that requirement has existed. You've got to have the occupation that you're on there. So if you're supposed to do roofing work on your ICEC and that's your independent business, you can go be a plumber and that's just fine, but you're not an independent contractor for that reason. You're working as an employee when you're doing work that's not what the ICEC specifically covers. The actual process for how people get multiple occupations on the ICEC, I'd much rather Tracy answer.
To give a little detail, we do try to, when we're talking with our applicants, we do try to have them provide as broad of an occupation as they can. So if somebody comes in and says that they're a general contractor or just construction, that's probably going to cover most of anything that they do within construction. But like you said, if they limit it to roofing and they're found doing something else, that could be a violation. Again, it's more prevalent when we have like fishing guide, roofer, that's black and white. Whereas like the roofing and the fascia, that might come down to an interpretation. But we do try to make them as broad as possible so that it covers as much as possible. And I know that we do work with people. It's very easy for them to add an occupation. They don't have to pay anything. They just have to provide an application stating that they're adding that occupation or removing one if they want, but adding one and then if it's separate and maybe has separate documents, then they need to provide those documents to us as well.
Great answers. Thank you both.
Thank you, John. Any further questions for Tracy? All right. Seeing none, we're going to move on to our discussion around enforcement with Teresa.
Teresa, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm Teresa McGowan-Schrozik and I'm the Bureau Chief for the Compliance Bureau. Our goal in the Compliance Bureau is to get businesses into compliance with as little interference as possible. So we work with businesses, contractors, independent contractors, when we find them out of compliance, to get them what they need before we start issuing penalties or anything like that. So next slide. I have 11 inspectors across the state who go out and do job site inspections. We look at the registration, licensing status of contractors, their ICECs if they have one. Unemployment, we can report employers to unemployment insurance if we find that they're out of compliance there. And then we do look to make sure there is a workers' compensation policy in place if it's required. We always had the option to issue a cease and desist, but I think it was the 23 session, the statute changed that said we must issue a cease and desist if we find uninsured employers on a construction site. And so we will issue those cease and desists anytime we find somebody without an active workers' compensation policy, if it's required. Next slide. Along with looking at construction sites, we also are those same 11 inspectors will look at a limited number of licenses. These are the licensing occupations that the inspectors have the authority to inspect. And then we look at apprentices while we're on the job site as well. I think it said multiple times, independent contractors are not a license. They're still a program, but we do look at those while we're on site as well. So next slide. We do look at prevailing wage job sites. While on a prevailing wage job site, we look at everything that we've looked at before, but we also take a look at certified payrolls, making sure that people are being paid for the job that they're working at, the correct classifications. And that all of the requirements of the prevailing wage statutes are being adhered to. Next slide. I think this is the one. So when we find somebody out of compliance on a job site, we allow 10 days for them to correct the violations. We give them information on what's needed. Sometimes our inspectors all carry iPads out there. They can even get folks into the like work comp and get them so they can get a policy right there on the spot. I had 2 inspectors up in Craig yesterday that were looking at an outfitter, doing a license inspection on an outfitter, and there was a construction site, so they just ran over there, found that they didn't have their IC and CR were out of compliance, they were expired, and they didn't have work comp. So we issued the cease and desist for the work comp. Before the 2 inspectors got back to Helena, the individuals had gotten their IC and CRs updated and were in the process of getting their work comp reinstated. And so that's kind of what our goal is that we can just get them into compliance as quickly as possible. For our professional licenses, if we find issues, we give them 10 days. We check for the compliance. If it is not achieved, we file a formal complaint with the complaint folks downstairs on the 4th floor, and they will look into the licensing violations. For the independent contractor, After 10 days, if they have not come into compliance, we issue a penalty, and they have 30 days to appeal that to the workers' compensation court. After 30 days, if there's no appeal filed, then we turn that over to our fiscal folks in them, and they pursue collection activities. We also, when we find people out of compliance, sometimes it's for wage and hour issues, sometimes it's for unemployment issues. We can send those a referral to our business compliance section, and they will do a full audit of the business to make sure they're in compliance with all the employment verification, wage and hour, uh, independent contractor registration. So they'll take a full look at the business. We do allow those businesses a chance for a self-audit and to come into compliance. If they do not come into compliance, then we will issue a formal decision and issue penalties associated with the various violations that we find. I will say again, the one thing that we don't give any time to come into compliance is workers' comp. When we find no workers' compensation, we do issue the immediate cease and desist. Next slide. Um, and this is, so for any general questions, you can call our number and ask to speak with a compliance specialist. People can send in an email and ask questions. And if that QR code, anybody can submit a complaint if they believe there's a licensing problem with any of the areas we look at. So that's what I had. Are there any questions?
Teresa, have one for you. I know this has been brought up in the legislature several times on some different topics. Can you kind of talk about the relationship between the Department of Labor and the localities as far as like building permit information and if you guys have access to that or not and kind of how that works?
So building permits are the building codes folks downstairs. My inspectors work very closely with the building codes inspectors. Uh, and but we have some clear lines on who has the authority to issue citations in those areas. So the building codes inspector may find a plumber out there that they have a question about. They'll contact our inspectors to go look at the plumbing license and see if there's a compliance issue there. But as far as any code violations, that would be Eric Copeland and his group.
Yeah, thank you. I was just mainly wanting to get it out there on kind of how that all worked. I know there's been questions around, well, can't you just look at building code or building permits that have been issued and go out and go to those sites?
We
So
do
that
have the authority to see that. We have the plans exchange. We have access to that for largely prevailing wage projects. We use that for, and then we'll look at. Our goal is so we might have a bunch of salons that need inspecting in the northeastern corner of the state. If we send an inspector up there, then we go and look and see what building permits have been issued and go and take a look at job sites and things like that while they're out there.
perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. Any further questions for Teresa? All right, seeing none. I'd like to thank the staff for being here. These last three sections have been great, and we really appreciate your information and the work that you do. So, our next item on the agenda is deciding what further issues we want to work on and kind of give some direction to staff on what we want our next meeting to look like and what issues we want to talk about. So I'll open up the floor to that. Okay. Aaron, do you have any kind of outline that you're looking at based off of our previous conversations or?
Yes, thank you, Senator Harvey. So I think we were supposed to start this topic at the end of May, but it didn't seem, based on the last meeting, that there was going to be enough, I guess, content to fill up this meeting with the workforce availability topic. And so I guess what would be really helpful for me moving forward is what else do you want to do with the construction contractor licensing and IC? Those seem to be pretty big topics that the whole subcommittee wanted to address, maybe looking at revisions to the exemptions or beefing it up. I don't know. But that was a pretty big portion of the topics that you guys identified in the very first meeting as wanting to address. And so the next meeting, which is at the end of this month, is probably the best time to do that. So I think, Hugh has he volunteered to do a little bit of research on the bonding issue. I don't know if anybody wants to do anything with ICs. So some feedback there would be really helpful.
Okay. Do we have some feedback on that? John. You're muted, John.
I don't, thank you again. I don't know that I see any problems with the IC as far as licensing goes. That's been a process that it's been a sore spot with a number of folks because what we talk about with Teresa's comments where people just simply don't have the certificate that they're supposed to have. That still goes on. And I don't know that we're ever going to fix that, but we can sure keep trying. But as far as the actual certificate, the way it is now, it seems to be a pretty okay program. And I don't know what changes you would make to the ICs as far as, well, they're not licensed to begin with. So I don't know what we could do any different than what's happening there already. My other comment or question, once again, this probably would go to Quentin, is in the I'm going to go back to this 239. The Department of Labor was given the task of rulemaking in this process. Has that been completely established, Clinton? Is the rulemaking process complete as far as licensing standards, application requirements, unprofessional conduct, consumer complaint? I thought I heard that earlier, but I just haven't seen any language regarding it.
Yeah, so we did do administrative rulemaking for construction contractors. Let me pull up the numbers so that I can tell you exactly where they are. So it's in 24-227 of the administrative rules, and I'm happy to drop this link in the chat so you can get directly there and don't have to navigate the rules site directly. But those were adopted effective January 1 of this year, in line with the license taking effect. So yes, those are there. Now, are we done with rulemaking? Never, essentially. We are. MAPA requires us to take an annual look at administrative rules. We certainly do that. We look at how things are working, how things aren't working, and if there are rules changes that are needed. So rulemaking is never really done because we have to keep evaluating the program, see what works and what we need to fix, if anything, about it. And that's part of this conversation here as well. What doesn't work is sometimes a statutory issue, and that's the conversation of the task force to figure out what you all think should happen with construction contractor licensing so that we can look at legislative ideas as well.
Thanks, Quentin. So that might be something that we add to that next agenda is looking through that rulemaking list. Once again, I have not seen that. I knew that the department was working on it. I just haven't seen it. And that would be the only thing I could think of barrier-wise if there was something in there that would affect contractor licensing. I just haven't read it. I haven't seen it. So
I'd suggest that they're quite short. There are, I believe, two total rules. Three rules. One is sets forth the fees, which carried it over. The other is the application rule, which says that you have to submit an application on the form provided by the department. And the third is the unprofessional conduct rule, which, as Hugh talked about a little bit earlier, just standardizes the notification requirements in line with the rest of occupational licensing, notifies within 30 days of change of ownership, which is relevant for CCL. You can't violate the law and you can't engage somebody to work who's not licensed. That's the sum total of the administrative rules. We kept them extremely close to the statute intentionally, and by conversations with the various stakeholder organizations, MBIA, Contractors Association, those sorts of things, to make sure that we weren't standing up something that was going to be onerous. So there are very minimal rules. Happy to have more conversations about them, but that's really it. There's really not more than that. So yeah.
Yeah, and if that's it, then I don't think that, well, I wouldn't have any problem with that. And I don't know what else we could do as far as this particular. So this is chapter 45, which is the one I'm most familiar with. And I don't see anything in there that would need changes as far as barriers and licensing requirements. I don't see any changes that we'd recommend in there. Or at least I wouldn't. Thank you.
Thanks. Any further input on directions for our next meeting?
Senator Harvey, if I may.
Yep. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Committee, so the only other topic that you have, so what I can say is we'll come back with the two data requests, follow-up data requests that John Harding had about the bonds and the history, or maybe it was Senator Nolan, sorry, just the history of the bonds. So we'll work on that. And then Representative Teal had asked for some data on IC rejections and that, so we can work on that to bring it back. Again, like I think this was the committee that I said last time that I would encourage you as you're thinking about changes or recommendations to not just think of statutory changes. If there's something that department process that can be improved or whatever. And I know that at the full task force meeting, we had the commissioner had actually asked this committee to review that licensee lookup tool, which is what Hugh showed you, both the IC or contractor registration lookup tool and then the full licensee lookup tool. And so if there's anything that anybody thinks could be improved upon that or would like some more information on that, education wise for the public about the differences between contractors and independent contractors. I'm just kind of throwing some stuff out there. We only have one more topic that's on the work plan, and that is license qualifications and justification for the actual license qualifications for the trades. And so that, I could start some of that for the May 29th meeting, but that's it. That's all you guys have on your work plan. And so maybe you guys could do a quick brainstorm and see what else you would like to discuss with this subcommittee.
John?
Oh, thank you again. I'll take more time. Sorry. This is the one subject that is a little closer to me, so I'm sorry to have so many comments. But part of, once again, back to 239, there we've talked about some educational funding, which would involve, in my estimation, education of the general public with contractors is probably one of the best things we could do in the world of trying to curtail or curb bad behaviors. Is remind the public to do their due diligence when they're hiring somebody. Get some references, check their work. Just take responsibility for their own choices, because a lot of those choices are when that bad person knocks on the door and you write them a check for 10 grand. Is that the guy's fault, or is that the homeowner's fault? And just that public education would be, that would be a really good public service announcement to remind the public continually that, there's just some bad folks out there and pay attention to them. That could be, and I think that was part of Hugh's conversation earlier, and he mentioned something about educational funding, and he wasn't able to offer what that might look like.
Thanks, John. Senator Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what John was talking about, I still have some concern or questions. How do we get that out to the public? I mean, I've asked this question for years. If the public knows, then they can make an educated decision. And I get that. I like that. But how do we do that? So if we have to research something, I have asked, I don't think I've asked Aaron this, but I've asked some others. How do we get that to the end of the road? So everybody knows, can be educated. Do you give a guy the $10,000 or not? I mean, you do need to do your due diligence. And I don't know, there's responsibility when you're a homeowner or a business owner and you're trying to do something that's costing money, and we regulate it from the state. I still don't know how you do that. I've seen ads in papers. I've seen shows where the people go to, hey, job fairs and other things, and you try to get that information out there. That's all good. We've been doing this for a long time, and it still isn't, I don't say it's fixed. So I don't know how we get that part of John's question to it. I see somebody might have an answer for us, but that's still a frustration for me. I don't know how we do that.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Bragg, do you have a response to that?
Good morning, members of the subcommittee. I was trying not to talk today. I did my level best. We currently do a little bit of outreach with regard to home shows and providing materials, making sure that folks know that we have independent contractor exemption certificates as well as contractor registration in place. That switch from 2025 into the 2027 or the new licensure structure is being accomplished right now. And so that will make our materials a little bit more updated. Senator Nolan has some great observations. How do you do that? There was a time and a place where sticking a billboard out on the road might get you some headway. Those are no longer looked at. I mean, people just drive by and they just forget about what they saw. So is it a radio campaign? Is it a TV campaign? And then that gets to the thing that worries me the most, which is cost. What's the cost for all of that? Hugh told you a little bit earlier in his presentation that the renewal fee for contractor registration was set in place at $70 in 1997. It's pretty much the same. And so we are running on a tight budget, and I have some concerns for how we would do that level of education. Having said that, I directly think it is the responsibility of the department through the legislation to do that education. And so having some further discussion about best avenues or practices, or if you would like to connect with me offline, I'm happy to have those conversations with you. But doing that education, I think, is imperative for us to make sure that homeowners know that they need to ask those questions, because a lot of us just take that for granted. When somebody comes out to their house, like me, who doesn't understand how plumbing works or whatever the case may be, or deck building, I just assuming that the person seems to be competent and has all their all their documents in good written order, that they're up to good. And so doing some education, I think, is important. It's also important to make sure that we have the resources to do that and that we're doing some targeted distributions of communications. So with that, Senator Harvey, that's all I had to add.
Thank you, Mr. Bragg. Back to you, Senator Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Kevin, in my discussions with lots of folks, and the governor included, I want, I would love to just not dictate, mandate, create more bureaucracy that people have to go through. But then it comes down to the state's not doing enough because you don't tell us how, you got all these bad actors potentially, because you only get a few. We might be lumping, and I might have lumped a bunch of people into one little area, but I'd rather not have to legislate and make a bill saying you will do this. But then we come back to people are concerned, they're frustrated. How do we know these things? I don't know how we do that. I appreciate your comments, Kevin, about what you just elaborated on. There's still no answers yet. There's still no fixes. And maybe it's something we can't do. We just let it go. We just we do the very best we can. Let the public is just going to have to learn from the rule of hard knocks. Maybe that's reality, because if you legislate and make laws too much, then obviously, I don't want to give you any more money, Kevin. I mean, too bad. No, I'm just kidding. But that's a concern. How much do we throw at this? And we have a lot of legislators that said, we're not going to do anything. Homeowners, that's their fault. That's their responsibility. Too bad. And then we don't have to come up with more. So drawing the line and figuring that fine line out of where do we spend and how much do we spend and how much do we give more to the agency, Department of Labor anyway. A fine line. I don't have an answer. All the smart people on the call and the other calls, and I know Aaron can just fix everything for us. So I'm hoping we do get something, but I'm not really excited. I was thinking, I can bring this bill, and I had some even ideas, and I thought, how is that going to help the whole public? Because they're not going to listen. There's no way to get the water to the end of the row in a farming analogy. So don't have an answer. Appreciate your comments. Hopefully we can brainstorm again and come up with, folks, you have a responsibility. We're not going to hold your hand too much. Here it is. So anyway, thank you again.
Thank you, Senator. Back to you, Mr. Bragg.
I don't want to turn it into point counterpoint, but I do want to be very clear. I am not asking for more resources for the Department of Labor and Industry. We don't need that. Every single license type, independent contractors is not a license type, but every single license type that we have is self-funded and sustaining. I do want to, and Quinlan will hate me for this, but I do want to ask Mr. Chair if Quinlan could talk about some of the complaints or the volume of complaints that we've gotten so far with regard to contractor license as it's being set up and effective January 1.
Yeah, that would be great, Mr. O'Connor.
I'm actually, Kevin, I don't hate you for that. I just would have appreciated an extra 30 seconds of notice so I could have actually pulled up the answer to that. It is currently loading. Here, I might be able to get it quickly for you. Yeah, so as of April 15th, we had 27 CCL complaints that had come in for the construction contractor license. Now, that being said, the majority of those at this point are not complaints that we have the ability to process. That is, they came in based on conduct that was in 2025 prior to the effective date of the license. And so we haven't been able to discipline cases because we didn't have jurisdiction. They weren't subject to jurisdiction of the department in this way for unprofessional conduct purposes prior to January 1 of this year, which was the effective date of House Bill 239. So we're still in very early stages of what it will look like to discipline. We are tracking, and I would need more than 30 seconds to put together and make sure it was clear in my own head before I told you the different bases that we're dismissing cases. If it's outside of jurisdiction, if it's a complaint about workmanship, those sorts of things we are putting together. So we'll have it as we progress in these conversations, and as we get closer to the legislative session and the data gets more robust, we'll be able to tell you what are the bases that we're seeing and whether those cause us concern or not. As Hugh mentioned earlier, the big exemption from CCL licensing requirements is an independent contractor with no employees. Whether that should continue to exist, I'm interested in what our data shows about how many complaints are we getting that fall in that category. So we are dismissing them because they aren't required to have a construction contractor license. Is that a place where we should have that exemption, or is it a place where we shouldn't have that exemption? Obviously, if they're exempt because they've got a plumbing license, well, plumbing can do the discipline, and that continues to exist, whether they've got a CCL or not. So we are taking a look at that, but that's as many complaints as we've gotten so far. Um, it's sort of trying to read a crystal ball about how many we're going to get as summer progresses. Um, with the winter the way it was, I don't know that construction slowed down as much as it might have otherwise, but still, with construction really taking place more in the warmer months, we would expect that we will see more complaints as time passes. But I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I hesitate to read too far into it. And the one constant in occupational licensing complaint volume is that you can't predict occupational complaint volume. I have tried to cut that data in all sorts of different ways, by license type, by board, by practice area, all sorts of different things. I have never found a period of time that predicts any other period of time, or an expected place where volume goes up, down, or indifferent. Even for highly seasonal occupations, things like outfitters, we still get complaints at random times of year. There's no basis to predict what it's going to look like. So we've had 27 from January 1 through April 15th. I can tell you for sure, but I can't tell you if that's going to predict what the next 8 months of the year look like or not, or anything else. So sorry for all the ambiguity of that, but that's where we are.
Senator Nolan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Quinlan, if you could get us maybe information, not right this minute, because I want to give you more than 30 seconds. So by next meeting or something, or reach back out to me. What's our comparison? So from 6 months or forever, from January till now, but I'd like to know what complaints we've had a year ago on the similar, if we're trying to compare apples to apples. If somebody could just let me know, because people will say, well, why are we even making a change if it didn't make a difference? I mean, if we only had 27 now, and last year we had 2, I kind of like to know if there was 157 last year between now and then versus what we have now. That'd be a curious thing, so I could have some answers.
Sure, and I'm happy to put together the data that we've got. I will say we're not going to have a comparison about last year because we didn't have the license. And so we were receiving complaints. We got a number of complaints through the licensing complaint form that we couldn't process because we didn't have jurisdiction to do anything about them. I know that the commissioner received complaints directly to her. I know that Teresa's shop received complaints directly to them. We received complaints in a bunch of different ways, but because we didn't have jurisdiction to discipline, we had extraordinarily limited jurisdiction. All we could say is you have a work comp policy or you don't get into compliance with the Work Comp Act. That's where we had authority. So I can't give you good numbers about what last year looked like. I can say sort of anecdotally, I think I was getting about a complaint a week through the licensing portal. On average, some weeks were, 6, some weeks had none. So we're ahead of that at 27 in the first 4 months. But it's very anecdotal and, trusting my gut about my memory of what happened a year ago during the legislative session and leading into it. But I'm happy to put together the information that we do have about the complaints and the updated numbers that we'll have by then of how many complaints we've received and what our base is for either proceeding with discipline or dismissing them are.
Thank you, Quinlan. Senator Nolan, do you have?
Yeah, I do. Another comment. Thank you. So Quinlan or staff or somebody, what else? So my bills matter because you couldn't do something until we presented this bill and got a bill to, was it 239 or whatever the number was. So those things matter. I'm not saying this too much tongue in cheek, but what else do we need to do that you want us to do? Because we have to create the bills so you can do the work, so you can whether penalize, educate, support, do your job more fairly. And I know that's a can of worms, so I think I'd let maybe you could refer all this information to our chairman.
Any response to that? right. Moving on. Back to you, Aaron. Where are we at? You need more direction, I'm guessing.
Thank you, Senator Harvey. So I think if it would be okay with the subcommittee, if Quinlan's data could be, if we could have until the June 26th meeting, just to give the program a little bit more time and him way more than 30 seconds to be able to pull the data together. I think it would be a little more valuable data if we just waited 2 months or two meetings instead of trying to pull it just in a few weeks. So what we can do, and well, I'll make this suggestion and let me know if you don't like it, is I can go through the public comments that we received because I know we received a lot of public comments, and there might be some good suggestions in there just for discussion. Because like I said, the only other thing in your work plan is the license qualification and justification topic. And so maybe for the next meeting, I can do a little digging in the public comments and see if, if there's any topics there and we can specifically address those along with the license qualifications. And then that'll give you guys some time to think about the construction contractor licensing program and the independent contractor program. And if you want to talk to me offline with some ideas, that's fine. In the next few weeks, but maybe we can do that and then revisit everything back in June.
I think that sounds good, Aaron.
Okay.
I do have a request that maybe Quinlan could add to his information. Um, while we were sitting here, I was looking back through some of the public comment myself, and it was brought up at some point. Um, what are the timelines? What are the turnarounds on complaints? So I don't know if Mr. O'Connor could kind of add that to his list. Just kind of an overview of how quick we're doing turnarounds on complaints. Um, I know obviously that can that can be very that can vary depending on the size of the complaint. But if we could kind of get us an average, so we kind of know how that process is going.
Absolutely. Just so I can clarify and make sure I get you what you want. Do you mean just for construction contractors, or do you want to see it across the board, or in construction related license types, or all of the
Uh,
above?
Probably in construction related license types.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Uh, Anything else from the subcommittee before we move to public comment? All right. Anything further, Aaron, that we need to do before public comment? All
Nope.
right. So at this time, the subcommittee now offers the public in attendance an opportunity to comment on any matter under the jurisdiction of this subcommittee that is not on the current agenda. Uh, this subcommittee cannot act, but will listen to comments and make asks to staff to place issues on further agendas. Um, Please remember to state your name once you're called upon and any affiliation you have. So we'll move to public comment.
Did you want me to call on them, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I can't
Okay.
see him from my
Oh,
end.
perfect. Okay, yep, I can do that. There was one comment that was submitted through the Q&A, and the comment says, "I don't think it is the responsibility of the government to educate the public on how to select a contractor." So that came through Q&A.
Okay.
All right, how about Dexter Teal? And you're muted.
Hello, my name is Dexter Teal. I'm the president of Teal Brothers Roofing. Our family business, has been in existence for 70 years, and I've been a part of it for 60. Been part of the management of the company for 45 years. And I'm a former president of the Montana Roofing Contractors Association. I'm the current chairman of the political committee for that, and I've also been on the board of directors of the National Roofers Association. And I listened to several things here. One thing that I really appreciate that's been said is that, like Ron White says, you can't fix stupid, and a lot of this stuff has to do with education. I wish that we had classes in high school today that would teach people about construction problems. There's insurance problems. There's quite a number of things that we send people out in a complex world that they don't understand very well. But with your subject in particular, the independent contractor is a huge problem in certain industries, the roofing industry being at the top of that leap because it's used as a method to stop protection for the workers, which is never a very good idea. I've been in meetings with OSHA, the Architecture and Engineer Division of the state of Montana, and they will tell you that most of their problems are related to independent contractor issues. Now, that's not true in every trade, but in high risk trades like roofing, and others, that's a huge problem. The bonding is it comes in three parts. The first part is that you have the financial ability to finish the job. And I listened to the Department of Labor Committee in the last session where a woman came in and she was just furious because they hired people and took the checks and ran off with it. And it would create a lot of consumer protection. Bonding with there's three parts. One is that you have the financial ability to pay the laborers, the financial ability to buy your material, and the ability to finish the project. And this would create a certain issue. It would create an environment that would, if people chose to use it, that it would create a little more stability, a little more honor in an industry that doesn't have a lot of it. There's probably no one thing that could finish everything, but some work in independent contractor, some work in bonding would certainly help a lot. And I appreciate Senator Nodland's comments that you can't do too much government regulation. One of the things that's fixed contracting in the commercial industry is when insurance companies start bringing regulations in. And I think that you could fix more things in construction by using parts of the private sector to do that same thing. And insurance companies is right on the top of the list. And you can create more accountability by general contractors on large commercial contractors or commercial projects. And there's just a plethora of things to do. No one thing will fix everything, but a few things will help a lot. But you have to have people that are experts in the industry, not somebody that just has a hammer and a pickup. It has to be people that really understand how the contracting business works. Our association, the Montana Roofers Association, we want to ask for changes in the independent contractors because we end up with so many people. Well, several, like five or six people get together. They're all independent contractors. They don't have to pay any workers' comp. The reality is, if somebody falls off if you're working on somebody's house and they fall off that house, then the uninsured contractor fund, workers' comp fund from the Department of Labor will pay the bill, and then they go out and sue whoever. And it's been stated to me several times, they're just going to find somebody with deep pockets. They don't care who's at fault. They don't do anything. But a consumer is going to have a lot of big issues with that kind of thing. So I just want to end with education would certainly be the best thing. Partnering with the private sector, insurance companies especially would help a lot. And you can't fix stupid, Ron White says. So there's a limit to how much that you can do. But I certainly applaud your efforts because there's just a lot of bad things happening in the construction business everywhere.
Thank you, Mr. Teal. Further public comment? Aaron, you're muted.
Sorry. Adrian Cotton.
Good morning, members of the subcommittee. My name is Adrienne Cotton. I represent the Montana Building Industry Association and our 1,600 business members and collective 26,000 employees. I appreciate the efforts of this subcommittee and the comments that we heard today, and thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly. Just want to reiterate that MBIA shares the concerns of this committee for bad actors, and we're really eager to be part of the conversation on solutions. I'd also want to talk about maybe ways that our members could aid in public awareness of the tools available to the public today. We have a lot of interface with the public, and we support this program and, continuing to enhance our industry. I also want to echo Mr. Harding's comments on ensuring that the Department of Labor and Industry is not focused on workmanship, but on professional behavior, and looking forward to your continued conversations. So thank you.
Thank you. Further public comments?
Yes, we have Jackie McBroom.
Good morning, all. My name is Jackie McBroom. I should say good morning, Chair Harvey and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jackie McBroom. I represent the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers. I'm part of the state conference, and our discussions this week on licensure. We just really believe it's more transparent to have that license on the individual physically. Right now, we believe that also having that license, contractor's license displayed on the workplace, be it either in on the job site itself or in the trailer where they, do most of their planning. We believe that is really the transparent way to do that. Having licensure like the contractor number on the truck itself when they pull up, that also gives the homeowner the opportunity to look that license number up. And I think that makes it more transparent. And just to kind of go over this, I'm speaking on behalf of all the IBW as per this conversation, and that's about 4,000 members in the state. So just please take that into consideration. Does it cost that much for the state to have a contractor put information on the side of their truck? Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Further public comments?
If anybody else has a wish to provide public comment, please raise your hand now. I don't see anybody else.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron. So it looks like our next meeting is scheduled for Friday, May 29th at 9 a.m. Via Zoom once again. And then, Aaron, do you want to touch on the future meetings?
Yes, I don't know exactly when they are. So yes, we'll meet again at the end of the month, and then after that, the next meeting for everybody will be, for this committee at least, will be the full task force meeting, which is scheduled for Monday, June 8th in Billings. It's going to be at City College, which is it's over on the west end of Billings. And so I will hopefully have some logistical information to provide the entire task force, but obviously all of you, very soon we're getting some room blocks secured, and then hope to have a preliminary agenda out, so you have an idea of what that discussion will be like. Just as a reminder that during that next full task force meeting, the task force will consider recommendations. And so if there's some recommendations you want me to draft up before the May 29th meeting, feel free to give me a call and we can work on those. But again, I'll bring some suggestions from the public to the next meeting. And then after that, I think we meet two more times, June 26th. And then again at the beginning of August, right before the task force itself wraps up its work, which is going to be, again, I'll send this communication out to the full task force, but it's going to be on Friday, August 21st in Butte at Montana Tech.
Sounds great. Anything else before we close, Aaron?
Oh, I'm good.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for your participation today, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you all.